Yo, what's going on, guys? SCJ here, back with another video, and today I want to talk about something many basketball fans are probably not aware of, and that's the fact that Byron Scott is almost definitely the person to blame for the Nets' 2003 NBA Finals loss to the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs' 2003 NBA Finals win would result in Tim Duncan, Greg Popovich, and the Spurs' second NBA championship and the first of 4 NBA championships that the Spurs dynasty of Parker, Ginobili, and Duncan would win together. However, there's a very good chance that said Spurs dynasty's first championship might not have come until 2 seasons later when they knocked off the Pistons in 7 games in 2005. Don't get me wrong, that Spurs dynasty is definitely a top 5 dynasty team of all time in my opinion, and it still would have been a tough task for J. Kidd and the Nets to take them down. But if Coach Byron Scott would have stuck with one change that he made for 3 games, the Nets might have had their first and only NBA championship. So let's take it back to May 29th, 2003. The San Antonio Spurs knock off Dirk Nowitzki and the Dallas Mavericks 90-78 to win the series in 6 games, and this came just 2 days after getting beaten by the same margin of 12 points and losing 103-91 in Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals. This meant that the Spurs were off to their second NBA Finals appearance in franchise history and the second appearance for Duncan and Coach Popovich as well. This also meant that the Spurs had 6 days to prepare for the team that they'd face in the NBA Finals, the New Jersey Nets. 5 days prior to the Spurs' Western Conference Finals win, the Nets completed their sweep of the tough and physical Pistons, who were led by 5-time All-Star Chauncey Billups and the man who was the reigning block leader and was an All-Star, the rebound leader, and Defensive Player of the Year that season, Ben Wallace. With the Spurs starting center, Hall of Famer David Robinson, announcing he would retire following that season as he was 37 years old at the time, the Spurs were reportedly nervous about facing the Nets, who swept the Pistons and won by an average margin of 9 points and won Game 4 by 20 points, despite Ben Wallace averaging 17.2 rebounds in those 4 games. It sounds funny to hear that now, as the Spurs would of course end up beating the Nets in the 03 Finals and doing so in 6 games, but according to reports, that was the honest truth. Now, instead of rewinding time like we just did, we're going to fast forward to 6 nights later and go back to San Antonio, Texas. At 8:30 p.m. on said night, the 2003 NBA Finals got underway. After 12 minutes of play, Spurs fans were on pins and needles, especially after hearing the reports that they were nervous about the Nets the previous week, as the Nets would lead the Spurs 21-18 after the first quarter. Coach Pop would do what he had become known for, and that's make the changes he feels are necessary, as the Spurs would outscore the Nets by 3 points just like the Nets did to them in the first quarter, and both teams headed to their locker rooms at the break, tied at 42 each. Apparently, Coach Pop wasn't done making changes and configuring his game plan after the Spurs outscored the Nets in the second quarter, as the Spurs would end up outscoring the Nets 32-17 in the third quarter. The Nets would end up outscoring the Spurs in the fourth quarter, but only by 3 points once again, and that meant that they'd lose 101-89. The Nets truthfully were unable to stop Tim Duncan as he put up an incredible performance of 32 points, 20 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, and a monstrous 7 blocks. If the Nets wanted to win this series, never mind just steal Game 2 in San Antonio 2 nights later, they were going to need to find some kind of answer or just some kind of way to at least slow down Tim Duncan if they were unable to stop him. Enter Dikembe Mutombo. Mutombo only played 6 minutes and put up an abysmal 2 rebounds and 1 block to go along with his 2 fouls, but 2 nights later, we saw a totally different Mutombo. 2 nights later, the Nets would end up victorious in Game 2 of the 2003 Finals, winning by a score of 87-85. While Mutombo's effect on the game might not show up too much on the stat sheet, Mutombo did a great job at least slowing down Duncan a bit. In 19 minutes, which was a huge uptick from the 6 minutes he played in Game 1, Mutombo might have only put up 4 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 blocks, but his defense and effect on the game was enough to help the Nets squeak out a victory. Duncan still put up good numbers with his 19 points, 12 rebounds, and 3 blocks, but he also ended up with 3 fouls and 4 turnovers. Duncan also only shot it at 42%, which was of course not good for a big man whose shots are mostly in the paint, especially after shooting 64% in Game 1. It looked like if the Nets wanted a shot at taking down the San Antonio Spurs, they had their answer on how to do it, and that answer was to keep giving Mutombo a good amount of playing time. In Game 3 and the Nets' first home game of the series, the Spurs would come out victorious like they did in Game 1. However, the only difference between the Spurs' Game 3 and their Game 1 win was the margin of victory they won by and the fact that Mutombo got Duncan into foul trouble and Duncan once again made sloppy turnovers like he did in Game 2. Despite Duncan having a great game like he did in Game 1, as he put up numbers of 21 points, 16 rebounds, and 7 assists, he had 5 turnovers and 3 fouls to add on to his stat line. Duncan also shot it under 50% once again after finishing with 46% shooting for the game. In terms of the margin of victory, like I said, the Spurs only won by 5 points rather than the 12 points like they did in Game 1, as the Game 3 final score was 84-79. Even though Mutombo played 18 minutes and Duncan was still the Tim Duncan we all know, this wasn't enough to make Byron Scott decrease Mutombo's minute load. In Game 4, the home team would end up tying the series up, despite the next victory only being a 1-point victory of 77-76. It was still a victory nonetheless. The Spurs got a very good all-around scoring performance from their guys, as Robinson had 14, Claxton and Ginobili had 10, and Duncan had another great performance, scoring a game-high 23 points to go with his 17 rebounds and 7 blocks. However, the Nets got 18 points from Richard Jefferson, 20 points from Kenyon Martin, and 16 points from Jason Kidd. The Nets bench or even their starters didn't step up too well aside from those guys, as the rest of the team, besides Jefferson, Martin, and Kidd, only scored 23 points combined. But it simply didn't matter, as they ended up outscoring the Spurs, and Dikembe Mutombo played great defense in the most amount of minutes he saw in the whole series. Mutombo saw 20 minutes and put up 4 points, 3 rebounds, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. Like I said before, not an eye-popping or great stat line, but his defense was so good that his effect on the game simply couldn't be shown through his stat line. Mutombo forced Duncan to turn the ball over and had him in foul trouble once again, as Duncan finished with 3 turnovers and 4 fouls this time. Never mind Duncan's shooting only coming in at 43.5%. The Nets tied the series up, and the series looked like a good one. It seemed like we were headed for an interesting and important Game 5 in East Rutherford, New Jersey, and it seemed like the Nets might have had the momentum and advantage over the Spurs after coming off a Game 4 victory and having the home court advantage 2 nights later. However, that wouldn't end up being the case. The Spurs arrived back in the Continental Airlines Arena 2 nights later for Game 5 and beat the Nets by double digits, winning by a score of 93-83. The reason being was Byron Scott went back to the same rotation and player minutes that he did for Game 1 in the blowout loss they suffered 9 days prior. The men off the bench Scott would play at over 20 minutes were center Aaron Williams and shooting guard Lucius Harris. Mutombo, exactly like in Game 1, only saw the court for 6 minutes. Also, just like in Game 1, Tim Duncan shot the ball over 50%. Game 5 was, of course, just the second time Duncan did this after Mutombo held the big man under 50% in Games 2 through 4. It might have only been Duncan's 3rd best performance of the series, but it was still historic and incredible nonetheless. To go along with his 55% shooting, Duncan put up 29 points, 17 rebounds, 4 assists, and 4 blocks. So I'm sure you were thinking, if that's Duncan's 3rd best performance, then that must mean Duncan's performance in the Spurs' Game 6 victory over the Nets, where they clinched the championship, was even better, correct? Oh yes, it was, and it was even better than his Game 1 performance as well, and Duncan got robbed of becoming the 5th man in NBA history to accomplish an historic stat line that we'll talk about in a little bit. So as the series headed back to San Antonio and the Nets were facing elimination, while the Spurs were looking to clinch their 2nd NBA championship, you would think that someone who was a good enough coach to win the Eastern Conference in 2 straight seasons, Scott would know that he must make Dikembe Mutombo a bigger factor and increase his minute load once again, right? But sadly, that's where you'd be wrong. Mutombo played under 10 minutes for the 3rd time in the series, as he was only on the court in San Antonio for 9 minutes, and Coach Scott didn't allow him to try and slow down Duncan in that Game 6 that ended the entire NBA postseason. In terms of that historic performance that I mentioned Duncan getting robbed of, well, he finished with a triple-double of 21 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and 8 blocks. How'd he get robbed then, you may be asking, if he still needed 2 more blocks and not just one that might have gotten counted incorrectly? Well, he actually did have 2 blocks that never got counted. The first of those 2 blocks, the league just counted as an out of bounds on Duncan, and the second, while it went down in the scorebook as a block, it went to Duncan's teammate David Robinson and not Duncan himself, which is once again incorrect, of course. So of course the Spurs would end up closing out the series after what should have been a quadruple double from Tim Duncan, and would have made him one of 6 players, along with his teammate David Robinson, to accomplish that feat. That Game 6 forced the Nets to go home, lick their wounds, and hope they could get back to the finals the following year or sometime down the line, but that would of course never happen. The Nets would fire Byron Scott in the middle of the following season, as he had the team playing mediocre or terrible, as they only won 22 of their first 42 games. So why did coach Byron Scott not play Dikembe Mutombo over 10 minutes in 3 of the 6 games that they played in that finals? Well, according to Steven Jackson on him and Matt Barnes' show that I always bring up, All the Smoke, he pretty much revealed that this was just something Coach Scott would do.
I started my first game, but what was good for me was I was on the team with the #1 draft pick, Kenyon Martin. We both were from Texas. We knew each other, so that was perfect for me. He had my back, and you know, when you're #1 pick, you come in the league, you do everything you want. So my rookie year was real smooth, and I had Stephon Marbury too. They really held me down. The sad part about my rookie year was I was leading all rookies in scoring. Come back from the rookie also game and don't play no more. Like Byron Scott just stopped playing me. Nobody knows why. To this day, he just stopped playing me, and that's how my rookie year ended.
You never got to ask him?
And the reason why I never asked him because the next year I went to San Antonio and ended up beating him in the finals. So it was no need to.
Good.
Yes, Jackson just stopped starting regularly after the return from the All-Star break, where he was actually in the rookie game during the 2000 to 2001 season, which was his rookie year. In the first 50 games, Jackson started 38 of those games and put up 9.7 points, 3.1 rebounds, 2.1 assists, and 1.3 steals, which are solid numbers for a rookie, especially one who was picked in the second round at the 42nd spot of the 1997 NBA draft. It seemed like Coach Scott's decision to squash Jackson's role with the team was a very big turnoff to Jackson, and rightfully so. Since Jackson was not signed to or locked into a rookie contract, as he was technically not a rookie, just playing his rookie season since the Suns waived him before the 97 season, and he was playing overseas until he arrived in Jersey in 2000, Jackson would end up leaving the Nets following the 2000 to 2001 season and sign with the team that beat the Nets in the 03 finals, the San Antonio Spurs. So I guess it was a little bit of revenge for Jackson, like he mentioned in that clip. So from what Steven Jackson said about Byron Scott, it seems like this was just a normal thing that Scott did. Why? Like I said before, we really don't know. And it's amazing that he did an okay or decent enough job as a coach for his team to get into the NBA Finals 2 years in a row. Yet, when he found the player and the game plan that helped him win the only 2 games they won in the 2003 NBA Finals, he abandoned said player and said game plan. Even if Byron Scott isn't the only reason that the Nets lost the 2003 Finals, he for sure is the biggest reason that the series didn't go 7 games and that the Nets weren't even given a chance to take the lead in the series in Game 5 or just win the series in general. If after getting embarrassed in Game 1, you find a plan that works for you and your team, as you win 2 of the 3 games you use that player more and execute said plan, it seems like you know what to do and how to expose the opposing team's kryptonite. It seemed like the underdog Nets knew how to take down the almighty San Antonio Spurs and had the momentum in that series, yet their coach abandoned what was working when it mattered most. I want to know what you guys think, though. Do you think Byron Scott is to blame for the Nets losing the 2003 NBA Finals? And do you think the Nets would have had their first and only NBA championship in franchise history if Coach Scott played Dikembe Mutombo 15 to 20 minutes in every game they played? Let me know down in the comments section below. Anyway, though, that's going to be it for me today. If you like this video, then give it a like. If you want to see more NBA content or breakdowns like this video or my others, hit that subscribe button. And I'm SCJ, and I am out. Peace.